Yeah.
So good afternoon, everyone, and firstly, happy International Women's Day. For those that don't know me, my name is Nicholas Edwards, and I'm a partner here at Hamilton Locke. Now, before we begin the panel session, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on whom we meet today. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Now, one of the themes people have chosen for this year's International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. It is the active call to question and to seek opportunity, and clearly from challenge comes change. From disruption can come opportunity, and clearly the events over the last 12 months have seen significant disruptions to both the global economies, but also to people's mindsets. One only need look at the various initiatives arising from the COVID pandemic to see how societal norms have changed in really short order, and often it is women leaders at the forefront of this. Our two guest speakers today seek to challenge the status quo with respect to two big issues that simply shouldn't be accepted by any of us: the scourge of poverty and also domestic violence. Both are courageous leaders who speak up and genuinely make a difference through their organisations. We're very lucky to have Mel and Melanie here, and thankfully they're both not Melanie.
We are actually.
We are both Melanie, but I think we've organised that, haven't we, Nicholas?
Now, our first guest is Melanie Noden, the CEO of the Hunger Project. Melanie has a diverse background in the corporate and not-for-profit sector and is driven by a long-held passionate belief in human rights, social justice, health, education and equality. The Hunger Project's goal is to end world hunger by 2030. The organisation's approach is to see the people living in hunger as the solution. Through education programs in agriculture, health and microfinance, they hope to shift the mindsets of the women and the men living in the poverty so they transform into leaders for the sustainable end of hunger. The aim is to empower people with the skills, knowledge and resources they need to break the poverty cycle. The organisation sets out three powerful pillars to achieve its goals: start with women, mobilise everyone and engage government. As a firm, we are very proud to work with the Hunger Project as one of our foundational pro bono clients. Our second guest is Mel Thomas, the CEO and founder of the KYUP project. I should also note that I chair the KYUP project. Mel has 20 years martial arts experience, is a champion black belt in Hapkido, a media commentator and an Australia Day ambassador. The goal of the KYUP project is to end the cycle of domestic violence, especially against women and children at a grassroots level. The organisation has run practical workshops in schools, crisis centres for women, rural centres, and some of the most remote Indigenous communities in Australia. The Violence Prevention Education Program inspires young people to value and champion their safety and well-being, and to break through limiting self-doubt. Mel, through her work, wants to inspire all Australians to raise their voice and claim their right to be safe. Again, our firm is very proud to have assisted Mel with the setup of her latest organisation, Your Buddy Check. Now, just in terms of quick housekeeping, we're going to have roughly a 20-minute panel discussion, which means each of our guest speakers gets about 2.5 minutes per question, and I'll try to keep that relative to time. We'll then have a chance for audience Q&A. So again, until that audience Q&A, perhaps stay on mute. So given the time constraints, we might just jump straight into the big questions, and I might go to you first, Melanie, if that's okay.
Sure.
So the UN stated theme for this year's International Women's Day is women in leadership, and in particular the focus is on achieving an equal future in a post-COVID-19 world. Do you think it's possible? And if so, what's the best pathway forward?
Great. Hi, everyone. Lovely to see everyone's faces today, but I will jump straight in. Look, I do absolutely believe it's possible to achieve an equal future. At the Hunger Project, our approach has always been that even seemingly impossible things are possible. If in our mindset we believe it's possible, we can make it happen. So we imagine a world where everyone goes to bed with a full belly. And that for me is an equal world. We've proven time and time again that we can make this a sustainable reality in the communities where we work. And so that the Hunger Project's work is really about unleashing the potential of tomorrow, today. It's critical that we do that. But it will take all of us working together, and the best pathway is empowering women and girls as key change agents for local communities. When half of the community are disempowered with no voice, freedom of movement, access to resources, we cannot solve the biggest world issues: gender equality, climate change, hunger and poverty. So women and girls breaking out of the status quo are the best drivers of community-wide change. And we at the Hunger Project have empowered and trained 500,000 women globally, and they are creating change at the grassroots. So to me, yes, it is possible to achieve an equal future wherever we live.
Thanks, Melanie. Mel.
Well, look, Melanie, I'm so inspired by what you do, and I feel as though there's a lot of synergy in what we're doing at KYUP Project. KYUP means to shout. It's a acronym where we use in martial arts, and our work is around empowering girls to raise their voice, to speak up for themselves and to speak up for each other. And we know, as a frontline domestic violence prevention educator, I know that gender equality is at the heart of domestic violence. I heard Anna Bligh say in an interview once that you don't hit someone you think is your equal. And I think that she really summed it up. So from my perspective in violence prevention education, we believe that schools are an important part, need to play an important part in helping us to have a more equal community. Now, when COVID hit, we couldn't get into the schools and we couldn't work on campuses. So we wanted to continue our mission to break the cycle of family and domestic violence at the grassroots and in our communities. And that's how Your Buddy Check was started. But I do believe that we can move forward through gender equality. And like you, Melanie, I believe everything is possible. And it starts with our girls. So we're working with girls. Sorry, I've got a bit of a delay. Technology always gets me. So, yeah, that's forward for us is in schools and with our girls.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. I guess for the next question, and we're sort of focusing on, I guess, the COVID-19 challenge. We know the pandemic was a challenging time for everyone, basically, in a whole raft of ways, both here in Australia and around the globe. In your personal and professional experience, what were the biggest challenges that arose for women out of the pandemic, and perhaps in relation to the spaces that your respective organisations work in?
Sure.
Why don't we just...
Do you want me to jump in, or are we going to...
stick with Melanie first and Mel second? Just
sure, sure, absolutely. We had a bit of uncertainty there. I didn't want to just jump in. I didn't want to assume that. But look, to me, a lot of progress has been made over the past few decades, and to some extent, some of that progress that we've made has been reversed during the pandemic. I'm going to focus on developing countries because, Mel, I know you can address what's happening here in Australia. But in developing countries, what was a health crisis really quickly turned into a humanitarian crisis. So, for example, in India, we work across India, Bangladesh, and Africa, but in India, it ranks second in the world to the greatest number of COVID cases at 11 million. And that's the tip of the iceberg given testing's low. But there we saw the strictest and most harshest lockdowns happened, and the freedoms that women had earned there were being curtailed and limited. So many women that we work with, had themselves COVID or were caring for others that had COVID. The factories and the workplaces were closed, and many of the daily workers, many of whom were women, were forced to walk sometimes thousands of kilometres home, often with their children. We saw that they faced various forms of violence, both hunger, gender-based, caste-based, psychological and others, while they had their support networks completely ripped from under them as they had to travel. So many became suddenly on the brink of destitution, and unfortunately in developing countries, traditionally, women eat least and last. So when you are forced into a situation where there is very little food, it is often the women and the girls who've suffered the most and become the most vulnerable. But fortunately, we trained, as I said earlier, 500,000 women leaders, representatives across our countries, and they became the social infrastructure that kept women and children safe. So, for example, one of the most challenging days I've had personally during COVID was when I spoke with our country director in India, and she told me about a family of 4 vulnerable children who'd lost both their parents, where child traffickers circled very quickly, which is horrific. 3 of them were young girls, And it was actually the women's representatives, the elected leaders, that actually found out about those children, took them to their uncles, ensured that they were given food parcels that the Hunger Project had funded and that they were kept safe. So social infrastructure is so important as women become more vulnerable.
Oh, absolutely. Look, for us over at KYUP Project and our work around domestic violence, we found when the pandemic hit that women were just as much in crisis. If they were already in crisis and their relationship felt like a prison, then being forced to work from home was essentially being the key being thrown away. We found that, so I couldn't no longer, as I said before, I couldn't work in the schools anymore doing our violence prevention education. So I turned my attention to the workplaces, and I discovered that 65% of Australian workplaces don't have domestic violence policy and training, which is a big deal when you've got 1 in 6 women and 1 in 16 men that are directly impacted by domestic violence in the workplace. Our challenge has been to motivate leaders to introduce domestic violence policy training and awareness and take it more seriously. And there was a big game changer event last year when the Supreme Court found that an employee was killed by her partner while she was working from home. There was a landmark Supreme Court ruling that deemed the employer liable. So what we found during the pandemic was people being forced to work from home, fiduciary responsibility. We had businesses that cared about domestic violence. They just didn't know what to do or how to introduce policy and how to make the workplace a safer place. So for us, the biggest challenge for around the pandemic was also our greatest opportunity since we're able to reach out to these businesses and offer up this help and support around training policy and awareness. Sorry, I keep breaking up back here, so it's a bit there's a bit of like lag.
You're coming across really well, Mel, so don't worry.
Okay. Oh, thanks.
I might pick up on the kind of the final sentiment you talked about, which is, I guess, opportunities. So the pandemic, albeit it has had catastrophic impacts, has also led to rapid transformation, particularly around the view of things like flexible work arrangements and societal shifts in relation to work and home. What do you think the biggest opportunities for women as a result of these changes? So I might go to Melanie first and then Mel.
Sure. Look, to me, lockdown, certainly in Australia, to me caused a shift in men spending more time at home, sharing the burden of running the household and childcare. So my hope in Australia is that equalisation will continue and persist. But in Africa, India and Bangladesh, we saw that women leaders that we'd mobilised and trained over many years were perfectly positioned to lead and influence the pandemic response in their communities. So they really stepped into their leadership and really leveraged the positions in society that they had to lift everyone up. They operated basically from existing foundations of leadership and strength and the network that had been created. And they rolled out intricate healthcare awareness campaigns in partnership with THP and reached the farthest corners of the developing countries in which we worked. For example, in a matter of months, in fact, almost weeks, in India, we did something we've never done before, and that is that we distributed food parcels to the most vulnerable, and we distributed it to 84,000 families, and we're able to do that because of the incredible women leaders who both could identify the most vulnerable and were the foot soldiers that went out and literally distributed the food and made sure it got to where it needed to get. So 135,000 plus of the most vulnerable widows and pregnant women were reached during this time. So to me, although there are some incredible challenges of COVID and to some extent I was going a little bit back in the equality that we've achieved, in other ways, it's actually really showcased what's possible when women are in charge and when there is a diverse and inclusive leadership that is embraced to ensure that everyone is lifted up during vulnerable times.
Thanks, Melanie. Well, closer to home, I suppose I'll talk more around the Australian situation that we faced during the pandemic and the shift that we had to take. What we found was that we had people that are identified as living in crisis in their lives, and then the pandemic hit and they were cut off. A lot of the not-for-profits that we partner with, they reached out to us and said, how do we connect with these people that we know are in crisis? There was one group up in Queensland who they deal with women that are experiencing postnatal depression. Now, we know that with domestic violence, the most dangerous times during a woman's journey is when she's pregnant and when she tries to leave the relationship. So the pandemic, it presented this experience where we had to find a way to connect with these people. So how were we going to do it? The answer was in one of the tools that we give in our workshops for kids and parents. It was like a buddy check system where you have a safe word and there's a series of questions and answers and ways that you can respond that help with disclosure, but also will assist the person who's in crisis to get the help they need. So we implemented this buddy system and we tightened it up, and we were able to support women that had been flagged already. And when I say flagged, I mean they were at most high risk of losing their lives or their babies' lives during their relationship. So that was one of the, like you, Melanie, you know, whilst there's the possibility of things going, sorry, have I dropped out again? So, no, okay, so everyone can hear me okay? Good.
Perfectly.
Oh God, I'm having such tech issues. Sorry, it's all happening over here with my iPad and anyway. Look, we found opportunities and we never gave up. We never stopped trying to connect with people that needed our help. We just had to do it a different way. We're back in schools now, and we're back in the shelters, and we're back doing our violence prevention programs with our role models and our female martial artists face to face. But now we've also developed these technical, not so much technical here, we've also had these technical support systems in place. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Mel, you are coming across loud and strong, don't worry.
Okay.
I guess finally, it's easy to focus on the challenges. It's very easy to focus on the negativity of last year and the pandemic, and everyone has had their own issues and their own problems as a result of it. But I guess for us, what has inspired you both over the last 12 months? And I guess what's reinforced your commitment to making a difference?
Sure. I'll step in again first. Look, to me, I'm really absolutely hopeful about the growing community of people in Australia and globally that no longer just accept the status quo. They're seeing the change that they can make individually and also collectively as a community. They're also understanding that small changes in our own lives can add up to a really great impact. Even if they didn't cause the problem, they can be part of that solution. You know, one of the great examples we're sort of seeing in Australia is climate change and how we're all changing how we live to make the world a better place. So to me, you know, I'm really positive about the personal power and agency that people are starting to kind of really gain. And I think that's sort of at the heart of what the Hunger Project does. We see people as a solution and in the driver's seat of their own change. And it's as true in developed countries as it is in the developing countries where we work. Some of the biggest issues in gender equality, climate change and hunger have to be solved globally. But it will take all of us acting together to be that change. So to me at THP, I'm really excited about the continuing growth in our community over the next few years, which will mean that it'll be giving people the opportunity to be part of that global, equitable, sustainable change that we all want. So as the community grows, we can all act together. And I think the Hunger Project's an amazing vehicle with the social infrastructure that we've created and the proof that actually, hunger, poverty, and gender inequality that change will happen if all of us act together and take that kind of make that change in our own lives. When people are, when there's an inequality and an imbalance, that's when gender-based violence happens, and when people are vulnerable, when people are poor, that also exacerbates a lot of those other things that happen, like the gender-based violence. So to me, we're going to make that shift. We all need to act together and recognise that in everything we do as role models, whether it be men or women, that we need to be that change.
I'm hopeful too. I am definitely a cup is well and truly full to overflowing kind of person. I'm hopeful that people are now listening to the Australian of the Year, Grace Tame, the conversation. We are shining a light into some of the darkest aspects that affect everybody in our community around abuse and family and domestic violence. I'm hopeful that more people will get behind the coalition that we have around coercive control. I'm hopeful that more businesses will see value and take up the opportunity to not only create policy, but to put a face to it, to own it, to be proud, to speak up against a pandemic within a pandemic, essentially. KYUP Project is in a fantastic position to empower people in our rural communities, and we're working with local leaders all across New South Wales to start, and that's going to be rolling out across Australia. But I'm hopeful because everybody's saying to us they want this, they want change, and they want us to come and work with them. And instead of us being, I'm seeing a real shift in everybody wanting to come and work with violence prevention educators such as ours, rather than us having to constantly go out and talk about the issues. They're seeing the issues and how we can help. So, yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm a glass who's fully full to overflowing, and yeah, it's really wonderful to be part of this event today and to hear about what Melanie's doing in her organisation, because it's an inspiration for us as we start grassroots, local, and we move out forward into the world. I'll stop. I know that face, Nicholas Edwards. Now I can hear that I'm coming in loud and clear.
No, that's no face. Fantastic, guys. We've got a couple of minutes for questions, so I would encourage anyone. I'm a technological Luddite, so please type your questions in the chat room, or alternatively just go off mute and ask your question. That's fine, but we'll leave a couple of minutes. I think Rick, if we hand up, I can see. Do you want to ask a question, Rick?
Yeah, I do. Look, Mel, I've not heard of what you do before, and thank God you're around doing it. You know, it's so critically important. You know, I've been an investor in the Hunger Project for 25 years now, and actually been to visit 6 different countries and see the work and the unbelievable difference it makes in empowering women. What I'm present to today, especially on International Women's Day, was when the conversation started 20 years ago in the Hunger Project, the women are the key, that it's going to be up to the women to actually transform their own communities. And it was so difficult to hear in Australia. As a privileged white male, I couldn't imagine that we actually lived in an environment here where women were subjugated. And it took a lot to get that into my fibre. Now, thank God, these voices are being raised in a way that they never have been before, and men still can't hear it. So it's going to take every one of us, and particularly our boys and our men, to actually get that they have a responsibility the way the world works, and, you know, to support what Melanie's up to and what the Hunger Project is up to. the extraordinary leverage with which every dollar is spent to give women a voice, to fundamentally transform not just their own lives, but their communities and onwards out to their countries. It's just so inspiring for me.
Yeah. Rick, you're an amazing advocate, but you know, to me, I remember going to India and sitting with women on the dirt floor in you know, their communities in India, and talking to the elected women's representatives there, and they were talking about gender-based violence and the impact it had there, and they were absolutely shocked when they asked us questions to hear that domestic violence was as prevalent in a wealthy community. They thought that domestic violence was just about your financial situation, whether you have access to food, but it is about equality in relationships, and whether you're wealthy or poor, if you don't have that equality and that respect within your relationship, that's when that vulnerability happens. So Mel, you know, what you're doing in Australia is so important, as important as what we're doing in the developing countries. Even with the wealth in Australia, we need to bring about that change in our sons and in our communities.
Yeah, well, it is. Thank you. And thank you, Rick, for your support across both of our projects. Look, you know, intimate partner violence is the leading cause of preventable death for girls aged 15 to women aged 44 in this country. It is preventable death are the key words that I really want people to take away. When I'm working in the schools and I'm working with boys just as much as girls, so family and domestic violence impacts boys as much as girls. And statistically, we're talking about men's violence against girls, women, and other men and boys. So it's a big conversation, and it takes moving beyond awareness campaigns into strong-hearted action, and that's what we're trying to. Well, that's what we are achieving at KYUP Project. We've had results with the South Australian government where we shifted the mindsets of boys. We did a workshop. Actually, Nick, I'm getting in trouble. I was invited to come and work with 189 boys in a school down in South Australia. I arrived. The principal said to us, "Great, we've got a really big issue here. The boys believe that they are entitled to belittle girls. They have been sexting the girls. They've been setting up hot or not groups, and all sorts of things have been going on." And they said, "By the way, Channel 7's inside. So as you go in, is it just you? You know, is it just you that's here?" I said, "Yeah, it's just me." When we empower boys to understand what it is that girls are up against, and see them as part of the solution, and also in many cases as victims too, then I've found that they raise up and they want to support the girls in their communities. And it takes strong female role models for kids. Kids can't be what they can't see. So yeah, we're really proud of the work we're doing at KYUP Project, and making a big difference at the grassroots.
Guys, does anyone have any further questions for the guys or comments? I'll take that as a no. Just in terms of key.
I have a question. I had a question, one question for Melanie and one question for Mel. So I might start with my question to Mel, which is, you know, you spoke about how only 65% of workplaces didn't have a domestic violence policy in place. I guess one of my questions was, what do you think were like barriers to workplaces adopting DV policies? Because, you know, like from our perspective, well, from my personal, you know, point of view, it's kind of like, oh, that should be foundational. Yeah, so what do you think has been the key obstacles?
I think that a lot of workplaces think they don't need it, that nobody's experiencing domestic violence issues. And I also think that they think it's too hard, that and that's one of the things that we really want to work towards, which is just simplifying the process and making it accessible for people. But yeah, but I don't think a lot of employers do know that if you have more than 100 employees, by law, you must have domestic violence policy. So I think that we need to have a bigger conversation so that people understand what that landscape looks like, that they can access and create policy and be proud of it. I know at Hamilton Locke we're working on policy and we're proud of what we're doing, and we're going to lead the way. And organisations that want to lead the way, this is one way they can do it.
Awesome. Yeah, and our conversations with you, Mel, have been amazing around creating ours. So very excited for that.
Me too.
Yeah, my question for Melanie was actually more of insight into your personal experience, I guess, because as Nick touched on in the introduction, I guess you went from the corporate world, banking, lawyer work, to not-for-profit. And I was curious what your experience was in just seeing or, you know, being a part of conversations that were gendered or, you know, I guess opportunities and ceilings based on gender and how it differed between the two kind of spheres.
Sure. One of my formative times when I was quite young, a statement a male colleague said to me, in fact, it was actually a very senior male partner said to me, he thought he was complimenting me. He said, "You think like a man." And I remember sort of looking at him absolutely horrified and said to him, "I think really well, but I don't need to think like a man to think really well." Like just everything that was entrenched in that one statement meant that he regarded me as something lesser than because I was a woman. And he was almost trying to sort of say, you know, you could be a man. If you keep thinking like a man, you could be a man. Well, actually, I was a woman and I was going to stay that way. And I wanted to really make a real shift. You know, there was a lot, you know, when I started, and I don't mind saying this, it was called Allen and Hemsley. Now it's changed names many times. The number of situations, difficult situations I got in with male partners because they just assumed that they were entitled. I won't go into all the details, but they assumed that they were entitled, and I had to defend against that. You know, I would try never to get in the room with certain partners on my own because I knew what would happen if I did. And when you're constantly thinking like that, it's quite a challenging environment to work in. And I went on to work in investment banks, and I think people know that they're probably almost a more challenging situation. But to me, what was endemic in those days was just complete disrespect. And when you've got disrespect, you then have that inequality and vulnerability. And you know, in those days, there were very, very few women at the top, and they had to be pretty tough to get there. So to me, I wanted to you know, in my life, wherever I worked, particularly as I got more senior, I wanted to make sure that, you know, as well as reaching up for my own kind of future potential, I reached down and also brought others with me, people who were more vulnerable, and many of them, oftentimes that were the women, and I, you know, having had some personal experience, you know, with domestic violence in my own family, I also do see that when women are empowered, they have an income, they have independence, you know, they are in a far more equal situation, and therefore, you know, are able to act and ensure that they get that respect, and make that change if they're not getting that respect. So my career in the not-for-profit sector started pro bono to begin with, and then changed to working with asylum seekers, where often I saw very, very vulnerable people, particularly women, and as a CEO of the Asylum Seekers Centre, and then into the Hunger Project, where to me, I wanted to go to the grassroots, to the most vulnerable communities, and work with empowering and enabling women as key change agents, but also equally as important, our second pillar is about mobilising the whole community together, because it will take all of us, men and women. And I think if we can shift to a world where men and women are more equal, I do think, you know, men benefit as much as women. You know, my husband and I together as a couple benefit from the fact that we are equal, because we share our problems equally together and our challenges and that happens across any relationship. If we're equal, then any problem is halved, and we can move forward together.
Thanks for the question, Amelia. Conscious of time, I might just give some key takeaways, at least that I've taken out of today, and hopefully they resonate with you. Look, I think change and equality is possible. I think that's the key hopeful theme that's coming out of both what Melanie and Mel said. I think empowerment of women and young girls is critical, but everyone needs to be involved. So I think, as Melanie alluded to, the engagement. I think we need to get organisational change, particularly around policies, as Mel kind of alluded to, around DV policies and the like, because it does make a difference to support people. Small changes do make a big difference. We can't accept the status quo, and equality in a relationship seems to be key across both issues. So I'd like you to thank both our guest speakers. I'm not sure how we do that through the wonders of a video call, but thank you very much, Melanie and Mel. You've been fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would encourage you all to go and check out both the Hunger Project and the KYUP Project to find out more about what they do and how you can get involved. Both of these organisations, as we've heard, have really lofty aims, but they're both achievable. Everyone can make a difference, so I do encourage you to get involved. Finally, thank you very much for attending on behalf of Hamilton Locke. I hope you have a wonderful day, but more importantly, have taken away some inspiration and continue to force some change. So thank you very much.
And also, I think thank you to Hamilton Locke for both hosting today, but also for the support they provide to both our organisations on a pro bono basis. You know, we need that sort of support. So great organisation, creating lots of possibility in both our organisations as well.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you. We can't do what we do without you. And I'm really, really very proud to be associated with Hamilton Locke and to have Nick working across the charity as our chairman as well. So thank you for supporting us and making a massive difference in the community with your help.
Yeah. And thanks, Mel, for sharing the stage with me. It's
yeah,
amazing
me
what
too.
you do.
I feel like I I was half here, half there, but yeah, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for showing up, and happy International Women's Day.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a
Thanks,
wonderful
guys.
day.
Thank you.